Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our final session on Wisconsin Trustee Trading Week. This is Jamie Machik with the Nicolet Federated Library System here in Green Bay. And we were having a few technical difficulties, to say the least. So I am actually going to be advancing the slides on behalf of our presenter. We've had to do this before, and you know what? We just, when we have difficulties, we just try to do whatever works. We have our presenter, Andromeda Yelton. On my speakerphone with the microphone up to her phone, she had some trouble getting into the program. So we're doing this in kind of an interesting way, but we're going to forge ahead and see how it works. So we thank you for your patience, and we thank you. If you hear us talking about what color slide she's on, that's why. She doesn't have the slides in front of her, which is not an easy thing to do, so I appreciate that she's even attempting this. So, as I said, our speaker today is Andromeda Yelton, and she is from Somerville, Massachusetts. And right now she is doing some library consulting. She was a 2013 Library Journal Mover and Shaker, and is currently a member of the LIDA Board of Directors. And today she's going to be talking about librarians who are adept in writing code and how it can build our staff and build our future. So, Andromeda, whenever you are ready, please go right ahead.
Thanks, Jamie. So yeah, I'm going to tell everyone about the awesome things you can do with technology, despite the fact that my technology is not working today. Great. Next slide, please. So I'm going to tell you all about the things that staff, library staff who can write computer code can do, including saving you money, delivering better service, and building the kinds of services that delivering those kinds of benefits to your library as well. I should have said next slide, because you didn't see my adorable there's a catch thing. So if you could be on the third slide now, the there's a catch picture. There it was. Next slide, please. This should be a forest overlook. This is where I'm coming from. This is Cooper's Rock State Park outside of my hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia. As Jamie mentioned, I'm now in Somerville, Massachusetts. So that's sort of metaphorically where I'm coming from. And more literally where I'm coming from is that one of the big things I do in my consulting that Jamie mentioned is I teach librarians how to code. So I've run various workshops on that, and I've spent a lot of time thinking and researching about how to do that effectively. I'm also in the process of writing a library technology report on ways that real librarians use short programs, not like giant pieces of software, but short, under 100-line programs in libraries, and that will probably be out in the first few months of 2015 from ALA TechSource. So the examples that I'm giving you are coming from the research I've been doing, talking to actual librarians about how they use code to make a difference in their libraries. So next slide, please. It should be purple. Say examples. And let me give you some examples. I will have, by the way, plenty of time at the end for questions about all of the stuff I'm going to say. I can't see what any of you may be saying in the chat room, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to wait to have that relayed to me at the end, but I will be happy to answer questions on all of this stuff. Okay, next slide. Example 1, do you have any Dora books? Kids' books can be shelved in lots of different places. If you have children's room, it probably has a sort of picture book section, an easy readers section, a juvenile fiction section. It may have special places for theme displays for this month or for summer reading for the schools or any sort of other thing. But when you've got a 6-year-old who just wants to know if you have some Dora books, you don't necessarily want to have to ransack every place in the library looking for them. And the librarian who wrote this script, this was, check my notes here, this is Mike Drake from Tulare County Library. His library catalog system didn't make it easy to search in all of those different places that the Dora books or the Thomas books or the Princess books or the Rainbow Fairy books or what have you might be shelved. And so librarians would have to look individually in the catalog at all of those places to see if they had anything, if it was available. And I mean, I don't know how many of you have 6-year-olds. I have a 7-year-old. She doesn't necessarily want to sit there and wait for however long it takes you to figure that stuff out. So he wrote a script that would automatically search the catalog for all the different places that these books could be and quickly give the librarian a list of here's the places that you look right now where the books are located in your library, available right now. So it made it much more efficient to answer little kids' questions. Next slide, please. Digital signage. You may well have a digital sign in your library that talks about upcoming events or something like that. This is an example from Matt Weaver at, I believe, Westlake Porter Public Library. And they had a digital sign that they purchased so that they could talk about meeting room availability. But unfortunately, it turned out that the software that powered the sign didn't really work with their workflows at all. They couldn't queue up events, so they had to have someone manually change what the sign was showing, at whatever time they actually needed to change it. And you can't tie an employee to your meeting schedule. You can't say, well, there has to be someone who changes the sign at 12 and 1 and 2 if there's stuff scheduled in the room at 12 and 1 and 2. That's not going to work. They might actually have to run the event or what have you. And so they had this system they purchased and they really couldn't use. And so what he did was he wrote a script that let them take data directly from their room reservation system and that let them put it all in a file so they could queue it up, and the sign could take care of updating itself whenever it needed to be updated. And next slide, please. Should be a purple background with a quote. The code rescued a rather expensive and unpopular project. So they had an issue where they'd spent money that they weren't getting any value from. They had morale problems because of it, and the fact that he could write code to make their hardware do what they actually wanted made things better. Next slide, please. We should be looking at a green background with a shot of a data dashboard. This is an actual data dashboard from Darien Library in Darien, Connecticut. And it may be a little hard to see some of the smaller text on your screen, so let me just cover what you're seeing here. There's a table at the top that covers the hours that the library is open, some of them, and there's a column for renewals and a column for checkouts. So you can see literally how many items were renewed and checked out every single hour of the day, when you're most busy, all of that. Unsurprisingly, it looks like people's lunch hour is a big, heavy checkout time in there. And then there's a graph of circulations per hour, and then at the bottom they tell you right now how many books are checked out right now, how many DVDs are checked out, how many audiobooks are checked out, how many other things are checked out. And then there's a sort of thermometer that shows you is this a slow day or a fast day for us. And so this is all information that you have in your ILS, your integrated library system, somewhere. But it's not necessarily easy to run a report and pull up this information. And so John Blyberg wrote this code to make it easy, basically, for them to monitor what's going on in their library right now. And if you go to the Darien Library, some of this information is actually on digital signage, ironically enough, like right near their main desks. And you can see sort of what's happening at the library right now. You can see the activity that's going on at the library right now. So that's a fun thing to see as a patron, but of course it's also a useful thing to see as a library administrator. You can see when your busy times of day are. You can see when you might need more staffing on the search desk. You can see how big your circulation is, which is the kind of number you're probably going to want to report to someone like your trustees later on. Next slide, please. And one thing Joan said about this is it enabled us to gather metrics data in 3 seconds, where it used to take about an hour and a half. So as trustees, I presume you're all pretty familiar with the importance of data in decision making. And if you can't monitor what's going on, you can't really tell if you're being successful at it. And it becomes very difficult to make strategic decisions. And fundamentally, if there's a thing that is going to take you an hour and a half to gather data about, you're not going to be doing that on a regular basis. You might do it, once a year or once a quarter if you have to include it in a report, but you're not going to use that data to sort of do an ongoing monitoring of how your circulation system is doing or whatever it is that you're measuring. When you can take your data gathering process from an hour and a half to 3 seconds, you have the data whenever you need it. And that means you can have a whole different set of strategic decisions and operational decisions available to you because you can monitor what's happening in your library in real time, and you can ask questions that you would never have been previously able to answer. Next slide, please.
Andromeda, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, just so you can catch your breath. You are doing awesome, and you sound awesome. And I just, again, want to reiterate to our audience that her speaking and not being able to view what she's looking at is not an easy thing, and she's doing great. Also, just wanted to remind you that this is being recorded, and the slides will be shared with you as well. So don't feel like if you miss something or if you can't write something down fast enough, that's fine, because we'll have that saved for you. And because I am manning the slides, Jean Anderson at the South Central Library System is managing the question box. Okay, so whenever you are ready, Andromeda.
Great. Yeah, I do tend to talk way too fast, and it is definitely harder when I can't see any of your reactions.
You're doing great.
I did want to say, in addition to your recording, all of these slides are also available on my website, AndromedaYelton.com. I have a page called, I think they're on my resume. I haven't put them on my talks page yet. They're definitely on my resume page. So you can also get them there. You can download them right now and then play along. Anyway, we should be on the slide that says open source software and hardware.
Yes.
Which is excellent. So yeah, open source software and hardware is, I would say, a trend, except it's really, I think, older than me. But it's still a trend that you've probably heard of. The webinar that you're seeing right now, the data is getting to you over open source software as well as some vendor-specific software. So open source software is everywhere, and it lets you do all kinds of stuff. But as you probably know, there's a catch, which is that open source software, although it's free to install, isn't always easy to install. And while in theory, because what open source means is that you can see the actual code that your programs are written in theory, that means you can modify it. But in practice, you can only modify open source code if you can write code. So in order to get the benefits of installing and operating open source software and hardware, which I'll get to, you really need to have people in your organization who have some system administration skills and some software skills so that they can actually install and customize this stuff. What does this mean in libraries? I've mentioned the integrated library system software a couple of times, which powers your catalog and your acquisition software and all kinds of sort of back office functions in the library. These are normally things that most libraries will buy from third-party vendors, and they can be quite expensive. There are libraries that are spending, $80,000, $90,000 a year on their ILSs. There are libraries that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this kind of software. And for that kind of money, you can hire a qualified system administrator or a qualified software developer who can install and maintain open source alternatives that do the same kind of stuff. But in addition, that person has the ability to customize the software. So if you find that your catalog doesn't do what you want, for instance, in the example of children's services above, you can change it. If you find that it's hard to get the data out of your catalog to build things like the data dashboard we saw above, you can change it. If you have someone with the skill to do it. And investing in people and in their skills is way more flexible and future-proof than investing in software. People can change the software. The software, you're very dependent on external vendors to change it, and they may or may not, care or have the same priorities that your library has. Websites are another huge place where open source software can be a big thing. Lots of libraries have their websites in WordPress or in Drupal, which are both open source. Lots of the sort of behind-the-scenes software that runs your web servers is frequently open source. And again, if you have people in your library who have the skills to install and customize that kind of stuff, you can get whatever kind of website you want, and you can update it whenever it needs to be updated, and you can change the whole design of it if you need to do that without having to be dependent on, external vendors or contracts to do that. You just have the skills in-house, and you can adapt on the fly to what you need. Open hardware is a smaller but growing trend in libraries. And what this means is that there's actually like little computers and sensors and stuff like that whose specifications are open. So instead of having to go buy a computer from a store and you have no idea how they made it, you can get the instructions that will show you, how do you build this little computer, this sensor from other parts? How do you connect them together to make new and more complex types of hardware? And there's lots of recipes for that. Why does that matter? Because there's lots of hardware that you're using in your library too to do things like gate counts. Or you may have things like temperature sensors or humidity sensors, particularly if you have a library that has some sort of special collection or historical collection that you need to keep safe. And some of that stuff can be hundreds or thousands of dollars. But the actual hardware that goes into those sensors and into even the computing power that you need to process the information about temperature or humidity or gate counts or whatever, that hardware only costs like $50. The thing that makes it expensive is sort of the knowledge that it takes to go from hardware to a system that you can deploy in the real world and expose to temperature changes and patrons running around all the time and dust and all that stuff that we get in the real world. But something I think we're going to see more libraries experimenting with is, can they replace expensive proprietary hardware that they use to do stuff around their library with significantly cheaper hardware that they can build and maintain themselves? Again, you have to have knowledge. You have to have a lot of knowledge in-house to make this practical. But the amount of knowledge, the amount you need to pay someone with that kind of skills is in many cases comparable to or less than what you're already paying for the software. But it gives you much more flexibility. All right, next slide. This should be a staff workflow slide with the kind of catalog that we basically don't use anymore, but that looks pretty awesome, I have to admit. Well, it's not true that we don't use them. I've totally seen them used as places to store office supplies or power Kindles or what have you. They're pretty convenient for lots of things. We just don't use them as catalogs anymore so much. Anyway, most of the examples I've given you are fairly front-of-the-house examples. They're examples of things that, as a patron, you would see walking in the door. Those are fun and relatable. But in practice, a lot of the people who come to my coding workshops work in technical services. There's a lot of catalogers. Because the people who work in the back end of your house dealing with data, dealing with records about books, dealing with records of acquisitions and so forth, they're doing computer tasks about data all the time. And so they tend to be the first to see the value that programming skills could bring to their jobs. And they tend to have the most immediate and obvious things to gain from being able to automate those tasks that they're doing all the time. So let me give you a couple of examples of that. Next slide, please. Purple one with a quote. Carrie Preston at Ohio University Libraries, who said, as my department's then only regular user of OML scripts, which is a programming language offered by their cataloging software, I had several times the cataloging productivity of any other cataloger in that department, even while spending a smaller percentage of my time on cataloging. Which is kind of the holy grail, right? You get more work done in less time. And one of the things she doesn't say, but that is probably also true, is her work was probably more accurate because computers are better at repetitive tasks than people are. People get tired and make spelling mistakes. People forget the semicolon that was supposed to be there, right? Computers don't forget the semicolon ever. So there's a lot of ways where you're dealing with repetitive data tasks. Computers are both faster and more accurate. And another example of that, next slide, please. This is from Becky Yost at the Grinnell College Libraries. They had a task they had to do with all of their new acquisitions. Every time they got a new record for a new book, they had to process it, to get it into their system and so forth. And they would get 10 to 20 of these a week, and it took them about 5 minutes per record to do it by hand. So that's 50 to 100 minutes per week, every week, of this record ingest process. And after she wrote a script to automate it, it was 2 minutes per week. Not 2 minutes per record, 2 minutes per week. And if you do the math, they were saving 1 to 2 person weeks of time every year on this. And that's the kind of thing that makes me ask, what would you do if you had an extra 1 to 2 person weeks per year at your library? If you could free up that much time, you know, what backlog do you have that you could attack and finally finish? What new things could you be doing that you're not doing? And more than that, you know, what could you be doing that would be more gratifying to the people at your library? Because the fact is, a lot of these repetitive, detail-oriented tasks are boring, and people do not like doing them. And people have creativity, and people have insight, and people have social skills, and all these things that computers don't have. And I look at numbers like this, and I say, what could you do with an extra week or two of human judgment and creativity and insight and empathy and all those great things that computers can't do ever? That's a lot. And who's ever engaged in those tasks is probably happier than they were when they were doing a repetitive task 50 to 100 minutes a week. So not just, you know, what else can you do with that time, but what can you do that's better and more human and more rewarding to the person who's doing it? Those are some examples of things you can do with coding skills in your library in all sorts of different library roles. I'm going to move on from this to talk about if you have people in your library who want to learn to code, what kind of support do they need in order to do it? Because that's a big thing where leadership comes into play. Because employees need support to have these skills. So, next slide, please. What learners need to learn to code are project and mentors. I've asked at this point dozens of people, you know, what advice do you have for someone who's learning to code? What would you tell them to do? And what all of them say is you need a project, and what most of them say is you need a mentor. And why does this matter? Projects matter because coding is hard. You know, it's fun if you like that sort of thing, as I do. If you like problem solving and logic and all of that, it's fun, but it's hard. And it can be confusing and it can be frustrating. And like any challenging skill, you need a reason to stick with it. You need something that motivates you. And many, many librarians are motivated by real-world tasks. They want to be working on something that makes their library better, or at least something that they're really into. You know, I had one student who, like, the thing that got her through was she wanted to write a program about her cats. Like, great, whatever's motivational for you, but it had to be a specific thing. Projects also, you know, they give you feedback. If you do something successfully, you get that sense of reward if you built a thing that works. And projects give you guidance about what to learn next, because there's so much you could learn about programming. You'll never ever know it all, and so you need to know what's the next thing that's useful. And having a project tells you that, so you know what you haven't built yet. And then learners need mentors for a couple of reasons. They need mentors because when you get stuck, it's great to have someone who knows a little more you can ask a question of. They need mentors because if they get frustrated, they need someone who can cheerlead them. And they need mentors because of the things that don't get taught in programming courses. Programming courses are great at, well, sometimes great. I'll get to that. Programming courses can be great at teaching things like what is a function, or, you know, what syntax do you need to write to make this program work. But there's a lot of other stuff that you need to know to be good at using programming in the real world. You need to know what are the tools that programmers use to write good programs. You need to know what are best practices. How do I tell if this is a good program or a bad program? You need to hear about, like, what are the new, like, trends emerging in programming so you can keep your skills sharp. And this stuff, you don't see any of it if you walk into an intro programming class. You see it all the time if you walk into a software development team, because people learn it from looking over each other's shoulders and working together on projects. So projects and mentors are critical. Next slide, please. Learning options. You know, assuming you've got someone who maybe has a project in mind, they maybe have someone to work with, but they really do need, like, to go out somewhere and get the basics, and you want to support them in professional development. You're trying to figure out what would be useful options. Where do they go? MOOCs are really trendy. We've all heard about, you know, Hour of Code or Code.org or Codecademy or Coursera or Udacity or something. They're sort of all over the place, but they're terrible, which is why I've crossed them out. Lots of librarians have tried them. Very few have finished them. There's a small handful of people they work for really well, but basically you have to be really, really self-motivated. You have to have a lot of sort of free time and energy to throw at them, and you have to be able to do stuff on your own. MOOCs don't really take into account how social learning is for many people. They're not good at giving you help if you get stuck. They're not individualized. So MOOCs look appealing because they're free and they've got all this free stuff, but they don't actually work for the vast majority of people. O'Reilly books. O'Reilly books are a bit better. O'Reilly is a technology publisher that makes basically the best books about any sort of software topic. And if you have intermediate to advanced programmers in your library, they will need at the very least a few copies of O'Reilly books covering the software they use regularly as a reference, because they're the best reference guides out there. They might also really benefit from a subscription to Safari, which is O'Reilly's ebook system that has everything they publish in it. They do really high quality ebooks. So that's awesome if you have people who already have some skills and want to develop more. I have a question mark because, again, it's not necessarily great for beginners. Beginners need people they can ask questions of. Beginners need to see really library-specific examples, which you're not going to get out of O'Reilly books. Boot camps. Again, with a question mark. I teach these, so I'm familiar with their strengths and their weaknesses, and they're sort of a popular option because sending people to a 1 or 2 day workshop works well with a lot of people's sort of schedules and professional development policies and stuff. And people can get excited, and people can see the basics, but people are not going to develop enough skills at programming to really apply them to your library from just a boot camp. You can get started there, but it's not going to be enough to get beginners really to a point where they can contribute these skills back to their library. So again, question mark. Courses. Lots of librarians want sort of more formal, structured learning options. So if you have like a community college doing programming classes near you, that can be a nice, formal, fairly cost-effective kind of option. Again, they probably won't have library-specific options, but they can cover a lot of the basics in a way that makes it much easier for librarians to self-teach going forward. And they can hook people up with those mentors and study groups and stuff like that. Similarly, local user groups can be a good option. Most programming languages or open source software packages or things like that have user groups, just people who get together and talk about the ways that they're using or learning these pieces of software. Mostly they organize through meetup.com, so you can find out if you have any near you. They can be really good. I probably should have put a question mark near them because some of them are sort of notorious for not being welcoming to new people, beginners, women, people of color. There can be problems with your local user group, but some of them are super awesome and super friendly. The Boston Python user group, they have a beginner's table at every single meeting, and they're really nice to new people, and they'll help you with your project. So local user groups are a great way to hook your librarians up with a broader community of people who are experts and who can help them if they're friendly. This is particularly relevant because in many cases, there's only really one librarian in any given library who has these skills or who is interested in these skills, and so they need to be able to meet people from other institutions in order to get the benefits of mentorship and collaboration. Next slide. So speaking of that, what kind of support do people need to take advantage of these options? Maybe some money. If they're going to something like a class, they may need some tuition. Mostly what they need is time. The way we structured the programming learning pipeline in this country is we kind of assumed that you taught yourself when you were 12, and you keep teaching yourself on your free time because you love it or whatever. And that's great, but I don't know about the rest of you, but I have a job, and I have a kid, and if I have just worked an 8-hour day and come home and done chores and childcare and put the kid to bed, and now it's 9 o'clock, this is not a time when I can learn intellectually intensive skills. This is not even a time when I want to learn intellectually intensive skills. This is a time when I want to, like, eat chocolate and watch Project Runway, right? People who are going to learn enough programming to be able to offer its benefits back to the library need to have time protected at work, when they're at their best, when they're awake, when they have energy, on a regular basis to learn and practice these skills and apply them to projects that they can use in their library. And that is really the biggest form of support that people need to learn. And then collaboration. If you have more than one person in your institution who wants to learn this, protect the time for them to work together. And if you don't, especially since you're a consortium and you're trustees and you have this big picture, help them find each other and help them have the ability to work together and do projects that can benefit all of their institutions, because they need each other to keep going and to get their skills past an elementary level. So in summary, next slide please. Coding is awesome because it lets you build an army of robot servants that can do the repetitive and the detail-oriented information tasks that computers can do better than humans and faster and more accurately. And in creating that army of robot servants, next slide please, you free yourself up to do the things that only humans can do. You free yourself up for the things that require creativity or insight or social skills. The reference transactions, showing the kid where the Dora book is and getting on to story time instead of spending 10 minutes looking at your catalog trying to see if you can do story time at all, right? Programming, I like it for its own sake. It's a fun problem-solving thing, but what I really like is the way that it lets us be human in better ways and be better at the things that only people can do. So that's my pitch for why programming is awesome and how you can help your staff get awesome at it if they would like to be. And now I have some time, next slide please, to take questions. So I guess I'll just listen and you will tell me if there are any questions in the question box.
Yes. So as I've mentioned the other days, if you do have a question for Andromeda, use the question box and we can get that to her. One that came in, someone asked, so we're a small rural library, and people who are tech savvy are expensive. Do you have any suggestions for this?
There's a great Code for Lib journal article that's about a small public library in rural, I think, Pennsylvania that has someone hired. And let me see if I can dig that up, although I can't actually cut and paste it effectively into, into the window because I'm not in the window. But
if you email that to me, I can.
Yes, I will email it to you, and you can cut and paste it. So I just found the
Yeah.
URL, and so you can paste it into the window there.
And I can put it in the follow-up email, too.
That, I think, is probably the best answer to your question. I guess the things that spring most readily to mind, and they are expensive. I mean, I live in one town outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts, so there's the software market here can be pretty intense. All right, Jamie, I just sent you the Code for Lib journal link. So one is what I said before, is that you're probably spending a fair amount of money on software now. And it is possible that you could be spending that money instead on people who could be running open source alternatives to what you're doing now, but who could also bring all of those skills to the building. Sure. Other options. The people who gravitate toward library technology are not necessarily the same set of people who gravitate toward the software market more broadly. They're people who have these skills, but who also have like a calling to public service. They're people who they don't want to be in like the 80-hour-a-week startup crazy world. They want to be in a sort of 40-hour-a-week, more sort of, different culture, a more public service-y culture. And some of them are people who, they're not city people. They don't want to live in the city necessarily. They might be from your area, and they would prefer to live in your area. So there are people out there who have sort of cultural reasons why they would actually rather be. I think the one in this Code for Lib journal article I just sent you, I think that he is actually part-time. You can get a lot of mileage out of part-time software people, actually. You can build a remarkable amount of software on 20 hours a week. And I think he has family reasons for wanting to be in the area. But there are certainly, there's a lot you can get out of part-time stuff if you can find a person who has that interest. And I think there actually there's a fair amount of technologists who would like to have more part-time jobs, either because, we have small children or because we have our own projects that we also want time to work on or what have you. So if you can have some flexibility in what kinds of positions you offer and recognize that there are ways that library jobs can be really appealing to certain classes of technologists, and you can make that pitch to the people who have the right personalities or backgrounds to be a good fit for you. But check out the Code for Lib journal article I was just sending you, and then look further at that library, because the library in this article has actually written a lot of stuff on how they do it.
Okay, great. And I will share that link she sent with all of you. Another question, what programming languages do you see being used most in libraries?
Python, Ruby, PHP, Perl, and JavaScript. And to disaggregate that a little bit, because that was a lot of stuff. I mean, to an extent, I think it doesn't matter what programming language people learn. This gets back to projects. The best programming language to learn is the one that lets you accomplish the project that you want to accomplish. So I would start with the project and look at the language second. But I definitely see sort of the big open source library projects. The newer ones are generally written in Ruby. The older ones are often written in Perl. People who are working with WordPress or Drupal, those are both in PHP, so that's really useful for those. People who are doing web development end up doing a lot of JavaScript, and people who are doing backroom technical services tasks, cataloging, making those things that used to take 50 minutes take 2 minutes, they're generally working in Perl if they learned to program more than 5 years ago, and Python if they learned to program fewer than 5 years ago.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that learners need mentors. So how do you see like a public library trustee fitting in that role, or maybe possibly serving in that mentor capacity?
So certainly my experience as a LEDA board member is that a thing which I'm going to treat as sort of parallel to the trustee role, a thing that I have is the big picture and the network. And so I think as a trustee, and especially as a trustee who's in a room with other trustees, talking to other trustees across a whole regional network, you're in a better position to see if there are people who need to be connected with each other, and you probably know a lot of people. So yeah, there's that. Mentorship in the library technology world often also happens online, but supported by face-to-face stuff. So for instance, the Code for Lib community has an active mailing list, an active IRC channel, and so we're all kind of in touch with each other online, and we can get some of that support online. But there's also a conference every year, and meeting people physically makes that online mentorship a lot more effective. Similarly, there's LEDA Forum. There's a LibTech Women mailing list that tends to have meetups at whatever relevant conferences there are. So that to me comes back to professional development support, and is that a strategic priority for your library?
So you're saying things like professional development should be toward the top of things that trustees are supporting in their libraries and in their staffs?
Yeah, I mean, to me that's like, it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? Because the environment that libraries are in is constantly changing, especially the technological environment. And if people's skills aren't improving, then you end up falling behind.
Sure.
You can't keep doing the same thing and have it work the same way in technology. But if you have skills, and you can not only update your thing, but you can make sure that the way you're doing the thing makes sense for your library. You're not just sort of copycatting what someone else is doing that may or may not make sense in your context.
Excellent. That's all we have for questions. If I don't know if you had more slides to show.
There's some photo credits at the end, which all of my the photos in here, they're not taken by me. They're taken by other people who have graciously put them under Creative Commons licenses. So yay! And there's just a few slides where I attribute all of those at the end. It would be nice if you showed briefly each of them. And then my own slides are also under a Creative Commons license, so you are free to download them and do whatever you want with them as long as you credit me and also make any works that you make out of them available under a Creative Commons.
Andromeda, is there an email address where people could contact you if they have further follow-up questions?
Yeah, the one you have, you can just copy-paste that into the window there. So andromeda.yelton@gmail.com.
Okay, I will also include that in the follow-up email. So any last closing thoughts on anything before we end for today?
Yeah, it really just comes back to I really like librarians. They're creative and interesting, and they come from so many different sort of wandering career paths, and they bring so many different skills. And I want to see the technology that gets built by librarians, because the technology that gets built by Silicon Valley or what have you doesn't necessarily support what librarians want to do. But if we don't know how to build our own, then we're kind of stuck with what we get. So it's important to me that we be able to build our own futures and support librarians who are amazing in being able to build what they really want their libraries to be like.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andromeda. You gave us a lot of great information. And again, thank you for doing this presentation without your notes in front of you. And I want to thank Jean for managing the question box. She did a great job with that. So again, the information we promised, the email and the link, we will send you in your follow-up email from GoToWebinar, so please watch for that. I want to thank all of you for watching these sessions this week. Whether you just tuned in today or you've tuned into every session this week, that's great. If you did not receive a survey at the end, I know some of you haven't, just email me any feedback, and I'll add that to the spreadsheet that we're developing with all of the feedback, because it is very important to us. This is the first time we're doing this. So again, thank you to all of you. Thank you to all the systems who supported this. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Andromeda. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.